Apologies, my phone ran out of storage and it just booted me out of my camera. But picking up where I left off, there were some things that my body was screaming for attention for that I had not been looking at, and that now coming back when I could crawl out and be at a point of baseline, it became extremely clear of things I needed to take action on. And the first two were leaving a very unhealthy job and living situation. And even though the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas was so enticing to so many people, for me personally, I had done 2,500 performances of the same show, and artistically, I was not growing. Spiritually, I was not growing. I was not being challenged, and I was just looking at this Groundhog Day hamster wheel future of doing something that was not asking enough of me, and that was just not my path for the long term, and I was forcing myself to go down it. So I put in my notice with the show and ended up leaving a couple months later, and I actually moved back to the club I was at. I didn't realize it wasn't necessarily the most healthy environment still, but going back ended up being a part of my healing journey, which I will get to in a second. But I went back to become a teacher and a choreographer and found an entirely new sense of passion and purpose. And I was on fire artistically and was taking all of these things I had learned as a performing artist back into the competitive world, and was giving myself in a new way and being challenged and just growing and having vision. And so that was incredibly healing and started to mitigate the anxiety symptoms a lot, because I was now engaged in something I was doing, and I still was having daily anxiety. It was always hard by the end of the day as the sun was going down and it was getting dark. That was a big trigger for me because it was still that trapped claustrophobia trigger, and I just had a harder time at night, especially in the winter when the nights are longer. But I was definitely, as I was coming into a new sense of passion and purpose, it started pulling me out of this anxiety a lot. And that spun into, I moved back to Las Vegas, and the relationship I had had for 7 years, we did distance for a year, but it ended up crumbling and falling apart like on my 30th birthday. And while that was so painful in the moment, in hindsight, as I moved out of that and past it and through it, it 100% was another big part of the anxiety healing, because that relationship, while it was loving and he is a good person and we are still good friends, it was suffocating me in ways that I did not know how to articulate even to myself, or couldn't even see myself, because it was my first real relationship and I was young and in my 20s when we got together, but it was just, we were not the right partners for each other at all, and he is not what I need in a partner at all. And I was becoming someone else to be with him. And when you suppress your authenticity so much for so long, the body will cry out. And that was happening in that anxiety, and why that trapped trigger happened or tied in so much, because I felt trapped in this relationship. Again, he's a good person and a loving human, but we were not right for each other. But I was hanging on to it for dear life because I felt like he was my lifeline, when in fact that whole relationship was stifling me in so many ways. So that relationship crumbled, and that was a lot of pain, but it pushed me into healing in a deeper way. And it was around that time that I started performing as a dancer. I was back in Las Vegas, and this was different than Cirque du Soleil, where I was doing the synchronized swimming, which was my main discipline. I was actually a go-go dancer. I do have a video about my journey on that if you would like to check it out. But that was an incredible step in liberation and empowerment. I was like 29, 30 at this point, and I was coming into myself now as a new single woman, but also coming from a background of such regimen and strictness and harshness from my coaches, and abuse I did to my body, abuse I did to my brain and emotions, and everything just being, this perfect position on this count, and so strict, to go-go dancing where it was improv and freestyle and just me putting my soul out there. that was incredibly healing, because I started to find for the first time in my life my power as a woman. And that, again, the panic, when you are in a state of panic, you can feel completely powerless. But that wasn't my body just causing me aimless suffering. That was my body saying, you need to grow. You need to get out of these stifling situations. You need to get out of what's holding you back. You need to get out of this abuse cycle, because there was a lot of toxic coaching within the show as well, from the coaches that came out of the same toxic synchronized swimming world. And my body was pushing me into this new way of being. And as I came into dancing and was following my heart on something, it was incredibly liberating, incredibly empowering to find my sexuality as a woman, to find to be able to stand on stage in front of 100,000 people and not feel self-conscious, but know that I'm owning it. And it was a spiritual thing to feel for the first time source energy actually coming through me and co-creating in that moment. And in that experience, even more anxiety started to fall away. And from there, it kept pushing me to, whereas at the height of my panic, I couldn't do road trips anymore. Flying was incredibly difficult. And just, even though I had left to go back to California to teach, that was so hard. I remember I had to drive 8 hours from Las Vegas back to Northern California. And as soon as I got into the middle of the desert, and driving through the Nevada desert, there's nothing. I was having such a bad panic attack and white knuckling my steering wheel, but I knew, I'm like, I have to get to California. I have to get out of this Las Vegas track. I turned on Beethoven's Ninth, which, if you don't know Beethoven's Ninth, it's so epic. It's the dun 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 dun, or that's the fifth, excuse me, but the ninth is the Ode to Joy. But I blasted that in my little yellow Beetle and was just singing along with the opera singers and just gunned it through the desert to get to the other side. But there were moments like that, moments like when I was performing as an aerialist for the first time with the company I dance for. It's called Insomniac. They do these gigantic music festivals. They asked me to be an aerialist, which I had performed as an aerialist in nightclubs while I was dancing, which on a hoop, it's called Circeau. But they invited me to perform at one of these events, and when I went to the staging for it, the day rehearsal, I saw that it was 30 feet up in the air, and the sets were gonna be 15 minutes long, and there was no safety harness, and I was 30 feet above concrete, and I was scared shitless because that was more than I had ever done. But in that moment, my soul was like, you have to do this. You have to conquer this dragon. And I, artistically as an artist, I wanted to achieve it, but I knew it was so important for my healing with this panic and this anxiety from this, because the other fundamental stem of my anxiety was there was the stem of, I am trapped in a situation that is toxic for me and trauma. And then there's the other stem that was just fundamental lack of trust in myself. Throughout all my years of ambition and drive and hunger to do what my soul was called to do, I didn't trust myself along the way at all, because I had no sense of self-worth. So there was this, every time a panic attack would come up, it was this feeling of I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't make it through. And I didn't want to just rely on pills to get through life. I'm like, I have to rely on myself. And so I would do these audacious, ridiculous things, like be up in the air for 15 minutes, hanging upside down by one arm in the splits above 30 feet, a 30-foot drop on concrete with crazy lights. And it was actually raining. This was in San Bernardino in November. It was 40 degrees and cold, but I remember up in the air on one of the sets, I was having a panic attack, and I just was like, I will not succumb to this, and I will not let myself down. I have to believe in myself. And there was no way out, because I was up in the air. And I could have maybe signaled to the technician or something like, danger, danger, but I didn't know if he could even see me. And I didn't want to let the show down. There were 60,000 people in the audience, and there were only 2 of us aerialists up in the air. So if I just bailed, that would be a downer. So that's a lot of pressure. But in that moment, it was just it was slaying this dragon. That's one thing Jordan Peterson, I'm a big fan if you haven't heard me talk about him, but with anything, if you forever hide from these dragons that show up in your life and just say, I can't, I can't, I can't, then you won't. But you have to take it in doses. Would I have been able to do this at the height of when I was very ill in 2012? No, but at this point, this was 2016. So quite a number of years later. And I pushed through it and I got through it, and on the other side was ecstasy. And like literal joy and ecstasy, not just because I got to have this incredible moment, and that was actually when, if anyone knows the artist Rufus Del Sol, it was this song called Inner Blue, which is one of my favorite songs, look it up. But it was all while that song was happening, and I had this like transcendental, psychedelic, amazing, like source energy performing experience as an artist. But it was also joy and ecstasy because it was like, wow, I was so scared in that moment and just dying, like literally dying with fear. But I came out on the other side and I did it. And that was the biggest medicine I could have given myself, was facing that fear head on and letting the full panic absorb in my body and saying, too bad. This fear is a liar. That's one of my favorite phrases. I forget where I saw that quote. I think it was like back on Instagram when I had Instagram 100 years ago, but I love this phrase and I use it with my students. Fear is a liar. You can come up to these walls of anxiety that tell you you can't and you won't and you're gonna die and you need to quit and back down and take this pill and whatever. But if you sit with it and go through it just a little bit more, then you can come out the other side, and then you can start to develop that sense of trust with yourself. And it's just one of, as I said, it's the biggest medicine I could have ever gotten, because I felt so empowered in that moment, and the fear just dies. The stronger you get, you just look at it and it just wilts in that moment. And I say to it, I talk to it when it is wanting to challenge me. I say, you don't have power over me the way you used to. And it fades. And I'll end with this. It came to, the biggest test of this coming to a head was COVID. This was March 2020, and it was the very beginning, and everyone was very scared. And I had just moved to San Diego, and I was living alone and in a situationship with a very toxic gentleman, not so much a gentleman, but guy, dude, bro, fuckboy, whatever you want to call him. No, he wasn't a fuckboy. He was just a man-child. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. It was March 2020. Everything was just shutting down. I had just lost my job as a teacher and as a synchronized swimming coach. And it was the very beginning. Everyone was very scared, and quarantine had started, and I started to feel sick. And then I started to feel really sick. And then I started to feel like, this is not a type of sick I've felt before. It was, everyone's had a fever, everyone's had a sore throat. And for a lot of people, that's all it was. But for me, things started to get really weird. I absolutely started to get that shortness of breath, and it started to get worse, and I just couldn't catch my breath. And I was, and you had heard I wasn't watching the news because I knew that would be, I just put out a video of this. I'm like, I'm not gonna watch the news. That's gonna like send me spinning. But still everyone was talking and you heard about it and you knew what the cardinal symptoms were. And then as the end of the day progressed, my breathing became really bad, and I had to force myself to try and get air in, and I was starting to get scared. And I phoned up the dude, wherever he was, and he was sort of living with me at the time. And I said, I'm pretty sure I have this, like something's wrong with my breathing. I definitely have a fever. I've been sweating all day and it's 50 degrees outside, like it's cold. And my throat is sore and I have that like sort of dry cough. All that's not really concerning, whatever, but like my breathing is messed up. And when he got that news, he did the worst possible thing, but the best possible thing. And that was, he grabbed his stuff from my house and he bailed. And he said, I can't be around you right now. And I felt so incredibly abandoned in that moment, and then ended up getting very, very sick during the night, to where it was that fish out of water thing, and I couldn't breathe at all. And I said, please come get me, please come take me to the hospital. I can't breathe. And he said no, because he didn't want to get sick. And even though this sounds terrible, this is not a video to bash on him. It was in that moment where I felt so rejected and abandoned, like, dude, like, first of all, I need you to drive me to the hospital. I can't move. Second of all, the not being so sick and then having your partner-ish person say, see ya, that was a whole extra layer of it. But there was magic that came out of that, because what happened was I ended up driving myself to the hospital. Luckily it was closer, and they didn't have tests back then. This was it was like March 20th or something that I got really sick, and they didn't have the test back then, and they didn't understand that when they scanned my lungs and there was no fluid, but they didn't understand that the reason people couldn't breathe was because the tissue had swollen and enough oxygen wasn't passing through the lungs into the bloodstream. They just saw there was no fluid, so like, you're okay. I'm like, I can't breathe, and like, so they sent me home, whatever. And then I got more sick and was just laying in bed for several days, not able to breathe. And as a synchronized swimmer, where I spent my life being acutely aware of my lung capacity and what it feels like to not have air and what my limits are when not having air, and also having more lung capacity than 90% of the people on the planet probably. I could hold my breath for 3 minutes. I know what it feels like to be dangerously out of oxygen, and I was there, and it was terrifying. I remember one of the nights I even slept with my door unlocked, because I'm like, I might die, and if someone comes looking for me, they'll need to be able to get in my house. So this all sounds horrible, and like coming to like, this is gonna be like a screwed up ending to this whole journey, but it ended up being magic, because that was probably the scariest moment of my life, and I had to go through it alone. But something magically clicked in my brain. This is why the body is so beautiful at the end of the day and actually wants to serve you at the end of the day. Something happened to where it knew, if you panic right now, if you go into a panic attack where you also can't breathe, but if you succumb to anxiety and panic right now, that will kill you. My body knew, my brain knew, you cannot succumb to those dragons. That decade of fear that you've been battling, where you had to pull yourself out of a 24/7 panic attack that you're having for a year, to daily panic for years and years and years on end, and not trusting yourself and going after things and getting a little better, but still having anxiety and telling yourself you can't get through it. If you succumb to that in this moment, you will die. And it was like a red pill in me, almost like, you know how much, if anyone's watched my videos, you know I'm obsessed with the movie Dune. But there's, in the first movie, the Gom Jabbar, where he has to put his hand in the box, and if he flinches or tries to escape because it's so scary and painful, she'll poison him and then he'll die. So it's like choosing between death and death, almost. I was in this moment of choosing between death and death, but where Timothy Chalamet, he like gets all badass in the music, and it's like seeing the fire, and sorry, I'm geeking out on Dune here, but like that literally was this moment for me of, I remember laying in bed and this panic starting to show up because I couldn't fucking breathe at all. And I was like thinking I'm going to die, and the media and everyone's all this buzz about this scary thing that's happening in the world. Something flipped, and this immense calm came over me, because it was my body saying, you have to have this. Because my family couldn't come visit me. I had no friends in San Diego yet, because I had just moved there and I was in a very isolated relationship. My dude had bailed on me. I couldn't, you know, my work people, everyone was in quarantine. No one could come save me. There was no Calvary. All I had was me. And it was either succumb to the fear and spin out and not make it, or have an immense trust in yourself in that moment. Have an immense dissolving of fear, of self-created fear, of self-doubt, of doubt in life, and just this incredible trust came over, and this incredible strength of, no, I want to live, so I need to be calm so that I can live. And I can't even say, I'm not even giving myself credit for that. It was this, I'm probably angelic, spiritual, whatever, something coming over me to save my life in that moment. But from that moment on, a switch had flipped to where, when anxiety would start to show up, nothing was ever as scary as that moment. I can breathe. I'm good. And it kept trying to show up, and the physiological responses from triggers in the world would show up. But this newfound strength of, I got through that by myself, so I can get through anything. This fear, you don't have power over me, because I just got through myself, through the scariest shit of my life by myself. And I'm not a victim that I was by myself. That was the universe giving me exactly what I needed to transcend years and years and years of suffering and fear. And that was the greatest gift that could have happened to me. Now, do I want you to go through those types of experiences for your own healing journey, those types of hells? No, definitely not. And everyone's healing journey is going to be completely different. This is not even an advice video or a do exactly what I did and you'll cure your panic. I have no idea what will cure your panic. Again, I'm not a professional. This is me just sharing my story, to hopefully give maybe some insight on even people that appear calm and cool and collective on the internet. We all have a background and nobody's perfect and nobody is just this Zen guru. So if you're spinning out yourself, it's okay. But also to give light on to anyone that is struggling to stay, yes, you can come to a better place and you don't have to be on those pills forever. I have no judgment on you taking them or how long you take them. They are harder to come off of the more you take them. But for me, it was a inherent desire to, my deeper spirit, my higher self knew I don't want to rely on something outside of myself to get better. The psychiatrist is not going to get you better. The therapist is not going to get you better. I did talk to therapists throughout all of this experience. Nothing helped. The only thing that helped me was a spirit, God, the universe, source, Mother Nature, Gaia, whoever you want to call it. That absolutely, that angelic presence was there for me. But it ultimately came down to learning to trust myself and come into my power and knowing that I can get through this, and also learning to, or not learning to, but taking decisive action on unhealthy things that were in my life, such as getting out of an unhealthy place of living in Las Vegas, an unhealthy job, an unhealthy relationship, starting to process trauma that was tied to years and years of an abusive, incredibly toxic situation. You have to give those things attention in order to heal. And when your body's not betraying you by showing this anxiety and this panic, it's a warning sign, and it's an invitation to go through really difficult things, but come out on the other side stronger and more whole and more in your power and more able to tune into your gifts and stay in your strength so you can be a force of good in the world. At least that's my experience of it. Okay, this was very, very long, and if you watched all of this and it was nourishing for you, hopefully not triggering, but maybe provided some understanding and some insight into your own life of where there are opportunities to heal and where there's hope to heal, let me know in the comments. I hope this provided some kind of nourishment for some of you watching, and for anyone suffering with panic disorder, I send my extreme heart out to you, because I wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy. I don't have enemies, but it literally is hell. And for those that haven't, it is hell. But I'm here sharing this story to say that there is another side of it, and you can come through it. And the worst moments, ultimately you will learn fear is a liar, and your body is your friend in this moment, because it is wanting you to heal. It's wanting you to come into your power. It's wanting you to start to create the life that you were meant to be living. Okay, that is the very long talk for today. Thank you for listening, and I will see you probably in a much more light next video. I wish you peace and presence and joy and clarity for the day. Bye.